October 12th, 2021. And in keeping with the Oregon Public Meetings Law, statutory land use hearing requirements, and Title 33 of the Portland City Code, the Portland Planning and Sustainability Commission is holding this meeting virtually. All members of the PSC are attending remotely, and the city has made several avenues available for the public to watch the broadcast of this meeting. The PSC is taking these steps as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to limit in-person contact and promote social distancing. The pandemic is an emergency that threatens the public health, safety, and welfare, which requires us to meet remotely by electronic communications. Thank you all for your patience, humor, flexibility, and understanding as we manage through this difficult situation to do the city's business. And with that, I will open the floor to items of interest from commissioners. Are there any? I will pose two of them. One of them is that your officers will be having at our next officers meeting, and perhaps the one after that, discussion on briefing topics for the commission. So I have notes from when we discussed this last at the PSC, briefings or panels or stuff like that. But if you have ideas that have come up since then, or you feel that perhaps we didn't take great notes, then please send me an email with any ideas, and we'll toss them all together and sort of see what rises to the top as things for us to learn more about or opine on. And also, I did the training that the city put on. I think several people on this call were also on it, on tribal relations. And one of the big thanks to Gabe for helping lead a great afternoon session on that. I found it really helpful. So I want to appreciate the city for hosting the PSC members who wanted to join that training. It was great.
Thanks, Eli. Appreciate it. Thanks for being there. I think I saw Jesse there as well.
Any other items of interest? All right, let's go to Director Durbin for your report.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, so I wanted to thank those of you that were able to participate in the tribal training last week. I also want to thank Laura John, who works for government relations and as our tribal liaison lead. She did a phenomenal job organizing that. There were over 500 people across the city that participated, and all virtually, of course. But I think it was really very informative, very helpful, and inspiring. So Commissioner Shuships, it was great to have you lead that session. Thank you again. Also wanted to let you all know that we have the Historic Resources Code project will start at council soon. We have a work session scheduled on October 21st. And then the first hearing will be on November 3rd. And Chair Spivak will be participating in that and representing the commission. So thank you very much. And then lastly, we are now live recruiting for our chief planner position for the city of Portland. Julie will send you all the job announcement. It just went live yesterday. The position will be open for the next 5 weeks. We're going to be working hard to spread the word and let folks know about this exciting opportunity. So would encourage you all to, when you receive the job announcement, to share it out with your networks. And I know several of you mentioned alumni networks and others that you'd want to tap as well. So would definitely appreciate you sharing that out far and wide. And that is it for this afternoon. Great to see you all.
Thank you so much. I know that it's already gone out to PSU's outreach posse for MERP students, and let's spread it further. Thank you. So let's move now to our first topic here. And that is going to be the East Portland Community Summit. We've received some briefing materials, so I'd like to welcome Bill Cunningham and Leslie Lum if she's here.
Hey, Eli, sorry, I'm really quickly. Can you do the consent?
Oh, I always forget that. Is that what you're saying?
All right.
Yeah, oh, well, let's do something else. Let's do the consent agenda for consideration of minutes from September 28th, 2021. Are there anyone want to vote to approve those minutes?
Before we do that, if I can jump in, Julie, I didn't see the corrected minutes. Did the correction you and I talked about on email get made?
Yes, they're in there. Sorry, Jeff.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Back around. They're posted, but
Okay,
yes.
thanks.
Well, Jeff, would you like to make the motion?
I move adoption of the minutes.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Steph got you beat there. And this is like Jeopardy, right? So all in favor, raise your real hand. I'll see you. All right, thanks. The minutes are adopted. And I will ask, I guess, as we open the East Portland session here, does anyone have any conflicts of interest or identities of interest to share for this topic? Okay, Then I'll pass the baton to staff, which I know Bill Cunningham and Leslie Lim worked on this project. I'm not sure who's going to present, but welcome.
Thank you, Eli and commissioners. This is Bill Cunningham with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I'm essentially just kicking off this briefing on the East Portland Community Summit. We're really going to be giving Unite staff center stage here, but I wanted to provide a little bit of context before we hand it over. I've been working with Leslie Lim to support Unite Oregon's work on the East Portland Community Summit, which was held just this past June. And this is funded in part by a Metro 2040 Planning and Development Grant. And I should point out that Leslie spearheaded moving that grant forward and obtaining it for the city and the community. They also received some additional funding from BPS. And to clarify what our intent was with this effort, it was to center the perspectives and needs of communities of color in East Portland and to use this to inform future city plans and investments in that part of town. And some things that I think you're probably doubtless aware is that a couple guiding documents for East Portland include the East Portland Action Plan, which was completed in 2009. And before that, the policy document is the Outer Southeast Community Plan, completed in 1996. And you're probably aware that East Portland has become a much different place since those times, much more diverse. Many of the area's communities of colors, including a lot of its Black community and immigrant communities, were not a huge part of those past planning projects and have often been the most impacted by lack of access to opportunity in the area and displacement, especially recently. And you may also be aware that East Portland is the home of about a third of Portland's children and youth. So it's a huge part of the future of Portland. It's also a place where about half of Portland's families living in poverty live. So huge issues there. Intent was to have an effort for East Portland outreach led by a community-based organization, which Unite Oregon led that charge. And a key intent was to really bring people and communities, such as immigrant communities who had not historically been a part of our past planning processes, and really they did an excellent job of doing that to a far greater extent than we could have as a bureau. And a cornerstone part of this was the East Portland Community Summit. I'm really going to turn it over to Unite Oregon staff to introduce themselves. They have a good team, so I'm not going to belabor the naming of names. I'll leave that to them. And they'll be sharing outcomes of the summit and recommendations that came out of that effort and other community engagement that they've been working on in East Portland. So with that, I'll turn it over to Katie Stringer and Con Lay and others in the team. And I should mention that Con Lay is their new Unite Oregon's new executive director. So you're welcoming someone in an awesome position of responsibility to your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I'll just go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Nuhamin Aiden. I spoke before you not that long ago on the West Portland Town Center plan. So it's nice to be back and speaking with this amazing team of people that really understand and champion the people's call for investment. And I just wanted to say Con Lee has informed me that he won't be able to join us today. He really wanted to, but as Bill mentioned, he's our new executive director. And as you can imagine, lots of phone calls, lots of meetings, just getting started in his new role. So he sends his regrets for not being able to join us today. However, the rest of our team is here and ready to get going with this presentation. So I'll just kick us off. As you know, Unite Oregon has a long history of community organizing with immigrants, refugees, Black and Indigenous communities, and other people of color in Oregon. We are a trusted community leader and are led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color, immigrants and refugees, as well as rural communities and people experiencing poverty. Our focus is on building equitable investments in Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas counties and the Rogue Valley. So introducing Unite and then just kicking off our presentation. My colleagues, Katie and Franklin and Callie are joining us here today and will introduce themselves as they present their sections. Thanks, Katie. Our East Portland Community Prosperity Initiative is one of our signature programs in East Portland. It's housed under the Community Development Program, and our focus is on building generational wealth for immigrants, refugees, Black and Indigenous communities, and other communities of color by empowering our communities to advocate for homeownership, entrepreneurship, workforce development, community safety, environmental justice, and educational opportunities. We want equitable investments in and for the communities we organize with, which build both power and generational wealth for us. The goal of the first phase of this project is to identify the issues and needs of community members and to pair them with the opportunities that the city and service providers can contribute. One thing to highlight from our report is the gaps in existing services. Even when services are available, it can still be difficult for our communities to navigate them. With partial backing through a grant from the City of Portland, Unite Oregon led a series of community engagement activities that culminated in an East Portland Community Summit on June 30th this year. Some of you were able to attend this event and even help with facilitating conversations and breakout rooms. And we were so glad to have your support in that regard. The final report provides a snapshot of discussions and surveys we collected with racially and culturally diverse community members in East Portland, Gresham, East Multnomah, and Clackamas County. This presentation will focus on our process, participation, and preliminary outcomes from our community engagement in East Portland, similar to what was documented in the final report. And with that, I pass it on to my colleague, Callie.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. My name is Callie Bradley. I use she and her pronouns, and I am the anti-displacement organizer for Unite Oregon, and I help facilitate the Anti-Displacement PDX Coalition. I just want to start by giving a little bit of background as to why we're focusing on East Portland in our work. And as Bill touched on, as the Portland region has grown over the last 20 years, many communities that we organize have been displaced out of the urban core and close-in neighborhoods, in particular East Portland and East County, although as well out to Southwest and out of Portland entirely. That displacement has harmed communities' ability to generate and retain wealth. East Portland is Portland's most diverse area, and it's going to continue to grow and change and continue to grow more diverse. And unfortunately, as folks here know very well, there's been a history of city disinvestment in these areas. As you drive east on a major road such as Burnside, it's impossible to ignore the difference you see when you start to cross into East Portland. Gravel roads connecting major thoroughfares, streets that are lucky to be paved, and you have to dodge potholes on many of those. Since it became part of the city in 1983, East Portland has not enjoyed the fruits of Portland's transformation into a major city. And that's led to profound challenges for people of color, immigrants, refugees, and working class folks who call East Portland home. Lack of access to living wage jobs, long commutes to and from work, low quality housing options, and more. The other thing we have to keep in mind is that between now and 2035, according to the Portland Comprehensive Plan's urban growth forecast, it's likely that East Portland is going to grow by about 24,000 housing units. And although that's crucial to meeting the housing need in this area, the key challenge that we need to concern ourselves with is making sure that the communities who live in East Portland now can enjoy the benefits of that growth and are not displaced as development takes place. You can see on this slide some of the major things we have been looking at in terms of concerns about East Portland. One is lack of access to city parks. 2 out of every 5 households in East Portland don't have ready access to a city park or green space, And that's in contrast with the rest of the city, where about 4 out of every 5 households live within a half mile of a park or natural area. You may have seen this come up in the recent heat emergencies, where the lack of urban tree canopy in this neighborhood exacerbates the urban heat island effect. And I apologize, I'm being joined by my feline assistant here, who's very particular about joining it for meetings. We have higher levels of pedestrian deaths in East Portland. According to our friends at Oregon Box, between 2017 and 2019, the pedestrian death rate per 100,000 is 3 times higher east of 82nd Avenue than west. And in general, the challenges facing East Portland are well known. It has a higher poverty level, lower educational attainment levels, higher levels of income inequality, and at the same time has some of the most diverse communities in the city. Another thing that we focus on East Portland in short because that's where the need is, that's where the risk is, and that's where the opportunity is. We're going to continue to work against displacement across the city, particularly in our work in the West Portland Town Center and the Southwest Equity Coalition, but we focus on East Portland as well because of so many of our communities struggling in those areas. And I just want to add that, my work in anti-displacement activism has been really influenced by Dr. Mindy Fullilove, who talks about what she calls root shock when communities are displaced or gentrified. We think we have a tendency in Portland to talk about displacement as an economic issue, right? Housing units, median family income, these kind of sanitized statistics that are valuable, but they don't paint the full picture. There's a human impact to uprooting communities that causes trauma, that causes dislocation. And we have an obligation to create the conditions where that trauma can be healed for communities that have already experienced successive waves of displacement. And displacement's not a new phenomenon in Portland. Black communities in Portland have been displaced 3, 4, 5 times. First from downtown and Old Town in the late 1800s, into the Memorial Coliseum and Albina areas, in the 1950s and 1960s with development into those areas, not to mention the practice of redlining creating de facto segregation in the city of Portland. And then the exacerbated displacement in the 60s and 70s, Legacy Emanuel, as well as in the late 90s, early aughts with development in Albina as part of the Interstate Corridor Urban Renewal Area and Yellow Line Max. In short, the communities that we are organizing have been traumatized by successive waves of displacement over generations, and we need to create the conditions where we can heal and repair that trauma at the same time that we are bringing investments and opportunities to East Portland. So the short version is, we cannot repeat this cycle by building up East Portland only to displace our communities out of it, and that's the work we're focusing on at Unite Oregon. And with that, I would love to turn it over to my colleague, Franklin.
Thanks, Callie. Oh. Hi, everyone. I'm Franklin. I'm the East Portland Economic Prosperity Organizer here at Unite. So I want to talk a little bit more about our community engagement process, which began with 2 online surveys that were administered between April and June of 2021. The first survey was distributed to community-based organizations to gain a better understanding of services provided, demographics served, and priorities and goals for East Portland. The second survey was intended for East Portland community members and focused on assessing the needs and assets of East Portland entrepreneurs and community members to identify priorities for change. Survey questions covered a broad range of topics, including housing, food security, transportation, businesses, and priorities for East Portland. With the help of paid translators and community organizers, the survey questions were translated and distributed in 7 languages, including Spanish, Somali, Nepali, Burmese, English, Vietnamese, and Chinese. Focus group discussions were conducted between May and June of 2021 via Zoom in order to collect more qualitative data, and were intentionally kept small, about 5 to 10 participants each, to ensure that in-depth narratives were gathered. Focus group questions were aimed at understanding participants' living, working, and transportation conditions in East Portland, as well as priorities for government projects and job training and small businesses. Focus groups were held in 5 languages, including Burmese, Spanish, Nepali, Somali, and English. And finally, the East Portland Community Summit brought together community members, local entrepreneurs, and stakeholders from across the city to listen to ideas, needs, and solutions, as well as to set goals for justice-centered wealth building in East Portland. The virtual event consisted of introductions and highlights from the surveys and focus groups, culturally specific breakout sessions for community members to share priorities and give input on government projects, and finally, back to the full session where facilitators shared highlights from the breakout sessions. The 9 languages that were represented at the Community Summit included Somali, Nepali, Burmese, Spanish, Vietnamese, English, Amharic, Tigrinya, and Arabic. Next, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Katie, to talk about the key findings.
Thank you, Franklin. I'm Katie Stringer. I use pronouns she, hers, and I'm the community development organizer at Unite Oregon, and I focus on East Portland in my work. So a little bit regarding just the summary and outcomes from this engagement process. So as you know, we facilitated this community engagement process in 3 phases from April to June 2021. So in terms of survey feedback, we received a total of 312 responses to the online survey in 7 languages. For focus groups, we had 36 participants in focus group discussions in 5 languages. And at the Community Summit, we had a total of 265 community members in the East Portland Community Summit join us, and 9 languages were represented. And in terms of facilitation of this process, in order to administer this, we enlisted the support of 13 volunteers, 10 paid translators, and 6 paid community organizers. So moving on to participant backgrounds, also derived from our community survey results. Looking at the demographics of the community members who participated in this engagement process, 50% identified as immigrants, 25% identified as refugees, and 2% identified as asylum seekers. 23% identified as American-born or preferred not to answer, and 68% of survey participants were aged between 18 and 44. In terms of housing, 51% of community members we surveyed rent housing, 38% own their housing, and 6% identified as houseless. Only 23% of participants said that their rent has not increased in the past 12 months. In terms of economic prosperity, 31% of community members that participated disclosed an average household income below $30,000. For reference, the median household income in 2019 in the Portland metro area was $71,000. 27% of participants were unable to save some of each paycheck, and 38% of participants were able to save less than 10% of each paycheck. For entrepreneurship and workforce development, 24% of households that we surveyed owned a small business. 6% had lost a business in the past year, and 22% were unemployed or currently on temporary suspension.
Katie, can I jump in with a quick question on that slide?
Yes, absolutely.
The 27% and 38%, are those additive between, does that mean that there are, if I can do my math.
Yes, they're additive.
Can't save 10% from each paycheck. Thank you.
Yep, yes, yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Yes, and then in terms of entrepreneurship, yes, we had 22% who identified as unemployed or on temporary suspension. So moving forward into some of our key findings. So these following themes reflect priorities that were identified in the survey answers, the focus groups, as well as the community summit discussions shared from individuals who live, work, and recreate in East Portland and East County. So the most common priority that was expressed throughout the community engagement process was the need for more affordable housing options, as well as mortgage and rent assistance. Community members in East Portland asked for support in helping pay rent, reducing rent, and mortgage payments. They also asked for support in learning how to qualify and apply for loans for buying a house. Many stated that if they rented, their rent payments are constantly increased beyond their ability to pay. Additionally, participants often voiced concerns regarding increased houselessness as well as displacement in East Portland, amplified by the effects of COVID-19 on the community. The second most frequently communicated priority by community members was public safety. Many East Portlanders do not feel safe on the streets, walking, going to work, school, public transit, and other places. Safety concerns were related to interpersonal violence, including an increase of gun violence in East Portland, racism and harassment, as well as traffic and pedestrian accidents due to a lack of infrastructure. In addition, the need for job training and education was regularly expressed throughout the surveys, focus groups, and summit. Participants regularly communicated the need for coaching for pre-employment tests, such as those given by large employers like Amazon, ESL courses, as well as culturally specific language classes to preserve culture, particularly for children, as well as technological literacy. Community members also often cited the need for scholarships to complete the GED and other continuing education efforts. There was also a great deal of interest in small businesses as well as entrepreneurship, including a wide range of interests such as food service and grocery stores, community gardening, art, as well as a space for classes and resources to start and maintain small businesses. Community members frequently expressed a desire to open a small business, but sometimes did not know where to begin or had difficulty securing capital to maintain their business. There is also a large need throughout East Portland for reliable, conveniently located childcare, especially for young children who are not yet school-aged. The key component for this is affordable childcare as well. In addition, there was a profound interest in community centers in East Portland that can provide a multitude of resources for communities, including culturally specific language classes to preserve culture, legal services, climate resilience resources, tax and financial assistance, job and small business support, as well as meals, food, and worship. In addition, many participants in the community engagement process expressed the need for culturally specific resource navigation, as well as bridge building between the city service providers and community members. I know that in my breakout group that I was a part of in the summit, I had several people say, you know, these services sound great, but we wouldn't have known about them if it wasn't for this summit bringing us together. So we noticed a real gap in the services available in East Portland and the knowledge of those services. So I would love to pass it off to my colleague, Callie, now for recommendations.
Thank you, Katie. All right, this is my favorite part, which is where we get to identify how it is we're going to solve all of these problems and how we're going to make sure that East Portland is a place where all of us can thrive. So the first recommendation I want to highlight is that government, philanthropic organizations, and businesses need to invest in affordable housing and provide options outside of traditional rental housing that focuses on culturally specific needs as well as pathways for economic stability. That includes investment in culturally and linguistic specific home ownership education programs, low or no interest loans, sponsorships for pathways to home ownership, as well as creative collective options like co-ops, land trusts, land banking. And as ARPA funds continue to flow to local jurisdictions, we need to ensure that we advocate for that funding to be allocated towards community-centered housing solutions. The next recommendation is around small business support. For services supporting small businesses to be truly effective, we recommend the creation of a small business incubator space in East Portland that focuses on small business startups for communities of color. Services we could provide include forgivable loans for small businesses to scale up, a mentorship program where more established entrepreneurs can share their expertise and be provided compensation for their work. To center the community in this kind of an incubator, we suggest creating a collaborative business model where several small businesses can share infrastructure such as assembly, warehousing, accounting, marketing, office, and retail space. Based on the needs identified, and as Katie was touching on, we also recommend the establishment of a workforce training center in East Portland that focuses on racially diverse communities. The center should focus on training for living wage jobs and include culturally and racially focused approaches to adult education, including languages other than English. In addition, we believe the city must invest in culturally specific training and job placement, and that community organizations which focus on climate resilient workforce and wealth building opportunities should be prioritized, including community gardens, trash and bottle collecting, and tree planting. Excuse me, I have someone at my door, as you can hear, so I'm wondering if I can pass it to one of my colleagues to pick this up for me. So sorry about that, y'all.
No worries, Callie. I can step in here and continue. And then when Callie comes back, then I'll just hand it back to her. Next, we recommend the establishment of one or more community centers in East Portland that allows community members to decide on programming and use of the building, create a funding model alongside local partners that support operations and programming. This community center should include indoor and outdoor space uses and encourage collaboration with communities and grassroots community-based organizations. All of these needs are of integral importance to our communities in East Portland, and they all feed into one another. We cannot address one of these needs without addressing the others. And that is why we are recommending that all of these services are incorporated into the space acquired to create a community and economic development center that supports itself. We envision a building that creates a holistic ecosystem of affordable housing, small business incubation, workforce development, and community gathering, a place for community members to organize and achieve their own vision of economic and community prosperity. Our next recommendation is for the city and service providers to focus on assisting families, in particular parents and caregivers, to assist with licensing, insurance, and setting up a business for childcare in the community. There's also a potential opportunity to create a collaborative business model so small childcare businesses can share costs. Based on responses from community members, we also recommend investing in culturally specific programs for pedestrian safety and prioritize constructing and connecting sidewalks. We also recommend the establishment of additional parks, green spaces, and community gardens in East Portland, and prioritize upkeep and improvements of existing green spaces. It's also vital that community is included in designing parks that are culturally responsive to community needs and address the urban heat island effect. We need investment in solutions to the root causes of poverty, homelessness, housing instability, violence, hunger, and other forms of scarcity. We reject investments in failed models like policing, incarceration, and sweeps. We demand that all investments in our communities prioritize the health and well-being of individuals, families, and neighborhoods. Finally, we recommend that the city invests in resource navigation services throughout all programs. Designate employees throughout bureaus to work specifically on connecting culturally specific community members to economic, political, social, and structural resources. And to echo what Katie was saying in the breakout groups at the summit, I heard similar things echoing throughout about resources being available, but not having pathways of passing that information along to communities that are already excluded and isolated. In order for us to truly have equitable investment in communities, we need to find better ways to connect communities with those resources. With that, I will kick it back to Katie.
Thank you, Callie and Nuhameen. So going back into our service provider engagement throughout the process. So in attendance at the summit were roughly 30 government staff and elected officials representing the city, metro, and other affiliated groups. Around 20 service providers were also in attendance, representing a wide range of services across East Portland. According to the stakeholder survey results, service providers who responded offer programs in the East Portland area that include but are not limited to affordable housing, youth services, transportation advocacy, leadership development, loans and economic services, technological literacy support, meals and hygiene services, and the list goes on. So we are calling on our local, state, and national partners that can assist with collaboration and investment to achieve this vision for an equitable, safe, and healthy community, because no one organization can achieve all these goals on their own. So while East Portland has recently been the focus of long-delayed investment by the city, a new vision is emerging from the community. Currently, we see a concentration of ARPA funds that have focused on the downtown core. However, we believe that the city can mitigate the inequitable investments by making a tangible allocation of funding to East Portland. Past organizing and advocacy efforts have unfortunately been disjointed and fraught with obstacles, from politics to a lack of leadership. Today, the challenges that face East Portland are more urgent than ever, with the economic and climate crisis, the impacts of COVID-19, housing instability, rising violence, over-policing, and hate incidents focused on our Black and Brown communities. Unite Oregon believes that Portland needs a clear, bold, and aggressive economic justice vision to uplift all communities, most importantly, those which have been historically excluded from wealth-building opportunities. This includes Black, Indigenous, immigrant, refugee, and people of color, as well as working-class people of all backgrounds. Unite Oregon is the only organization in the region that can lead, organize, and implement this vision due to our years of empowering multicultural and multiracial communities and building the bridge between those with the resources and those with the need. We're committed to realizing this vision by engaging with the strength and power of our community, as well as leveraging resources from all sectors to accomplish this. We're inviting our partners to work with us to meet this challenge. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Unite staff. I'm going to turn it back to them to field your questions, but just wanted to say a little bit about next steps. But again, thanks, Nuhamin, Katie, Kaylee, Franklin. Great job. Really appreciated your sharing. So next steps, we are planning to go with Unite to present to City Council, although that may not happen until January or February, after we get past the whole fall bump budget discussions and a number of other things that are in the queue. And in the meantime, BPS is going to be working with other city bureaus to explore opportunities to leverage American Rescue Plan funds to start addressing some of the priorities that Unite addressed, at least in the short term, and exploring the possibility as to whether there could be advantages to an East Portland package funded by ARPA. So that's in process currently. We're also going to be continuing discussions with Unite, EPAP, and other East Portland community groups to identify what a future community planning framework or strategy might look like for East Portland to address a longer term set of issues for East Portland. So that's about it now in terms of next steps: City Council, ARPA funds, and beginning to work on a longer term policy framework for East Portland. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the Unite folks to answer questions you might have.
Thank you for the great presentation to Nuhamin, Callie, Franklin, Katie, and Bill. And I'm going to ask if someone could just maybe not share the screen, and that way we can all see each other, and let commissioners raise your virtual hands, I guess, so I can keep track of what we want to find out. Thank you.
Just to let folks know, Con Lee has joined us, and we just want to give him a chance to introduce himself. And
terrific, yeah. Con Lee, welcome.
Thank you, commissioners. I apologize. I was on a phone call with an elected leader, and I didn't want to cut them off. Again, my name is Con Lee. Pronouns he, him, his. I am our Unite Oregon's new executive director, so I'm excited to be here in the partnership with BPS, and we hope to work with the city to get things done quickly. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, and then we'll have some questions. Steph, welcome.
I will always have questions. I try to wait. First, thank you, Franklin, Nuhamin, Katie, Callie, and Conley. Thank you for choosing to serve executive director. That's wonderful news. Related to ARPA funding, you've mentioned it a few times. Just curious, and I'd specifically love from BPS staff, like what is the current disposition of ARPA asks, and how can PSC support?
Thank you very much for the question. And I want to add my congratulations to Conley for serving on as executive director. We're really excited to work with you and very happy to be working with Unite. So Commissioner Roth, the answer to that question is we're still waiting for specific instructions for the budget office. And we anticipate that the next round of ARPA will run in parallel with the next budget process, when we're waiting for guidelines about the goals and kind of sidebars for the ARPA 2.0 allocation of funding. But we absolutely would like to work with Unite and other East Portland organizations to put together a proposal to help fund kind of priorities in East Portland, at least start some of that investment and really have it reflect kind of what Unite has gathered from community input sessions in terms of kind of the priority needs.
Thank you.
And we would definitely will share back with the Planning Sustainability Commission, because I think it'll be a place where it'd be great to have your engagement and support and conveyance to council that this is a priority.
Thanks. Gabe.
Yeah. Andrew kind of answered my question, but I just wanted to say thank you to Nuhamin, Callie, Katie, everybody for sharing, and I really appreciate Unite's work and doing thorough community engagement. And a lot of those points in there were really strong, and I really appreciate sharing at this table, kind of that one organization can't do all of this work and all of this work that is so dearly related to one another, directly related. And this effort that you've been leading, spearheading, I think is very important right now for our community in East Portland. So I'm really thankful for you for being here and for sharing in that way, and your very thorough approach and the way this information was presented. So thank you.
Thank you. Katie, and then Erica. Katie.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you too. I mean, the problems in East Portland have been pretty evident for a long time, and many people have worked on them, but it's always so good to have, it's kind of like the next generation or the next set of eyes going on to our community. I myself have been advocating for a new plan for East Portland. And so I'm just kind of wondering, because I was a member of the East Portland Action Plan for many years, and we, that plan has kind of aged out, and it's time for, a new plan. And I was just wondering if that's what you mean by a policy framework, your third level, or are you talking about something else, Bill?
In terms of a future policy framework, I think it's really dependent on more conversations with the community to identify what kind of policy framework is needed, whether it's an update to East Portland Action Plan or something beyond that. EPAP organization currently is surveying their membership on the future of EPAP. So there's a lot happening on the community end in EPAP to identify where to go now. And so we're thankful that the community is working on that, that EPAP is looking inward and looking at the broader community to see what the next steps for them are. And we're really interested in having that play out and hear back from EPAP. My understanding is they're both looking at what's the future and also looking at what's been accomplished in the East Portland Action Plan? Are there new emerging priorities that suggest it needs a refresh? But that is currently in process.
Yeah, and I wasn't really asking if you're going to update the East Portland Action Plan. I was really thinking that actually it needs a new plan. But but I guess I would love to know what would be the decision space around that is. Like, what are you talking about when you're talking about a policy framework? And I just want to urge, the Unite and all the people that have worked so hard for East Portland is to think about including a lot of, it can't just be a county plan. It can't just be a city plan. It has to be, really broad and pull in a lot of expertise because, I was like, I heard you asking for a center for job development. And that's something that East Portland Action Plan finally just gave up on getting. It's even in the, other planning documents for East Portland. So you would think that we would have it, but we don't have it. So some things have been harder to get, but it's kind of like you got to keep asking. So thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you. Erica? No?
Yeah, thank you to the Unite Oregon group for the presentation. It was very thoughtfully presented and put together, and I appreciate you all being here today. My question, I think, builds on some of the other comments and points that have been made. And Katie just mentioned that the idea of a community center has been in play for a long time, and we're not there yet. And so I guess my question is, for Bill, what the PSC can do to create sustained focus and momentum around the priorities that Unite Oregon shared with us. And then for the Unite team, my question would be, you talked about some of the, I guess, successes, like with the summit and working with the city on that, and also some of the challenges that you faced previously. And I'm wondering if you could share more specific examples, or if you have ideas of things that have worked well, if there are positive behaviors or patterns that have been productive and built trust with the community. And then similarly, if there are instances that have been counterproductive or specific frustrations, it would be really helpful to hear more about that.
Nice.
I'm fine with having Unite answer first, and then I'll get back to you about how you could support a discussion with City Council.
Yeah, I can start us off in terms of what we mentioned in our presentation about previous attempts at ensuring public safety through policing, or ensuring public safety through having more, or like putting folks away, like investing in the carceral system. Like, we know these forms of addressing public safety are not helpful at all. They result in more violence in communities. And we do ask for the city's focus on investment in our communities through workforce development, through providing investment in infrastructure that actually builds up communities. And really, we're working toward a shift in how we think about safety, and also in how we do community engagement. Centering our communities and listening to our communities is the first step to understanding what is actually needed in those communities. And this summit is one way that we were able to demonstrate that. When elected leaders and service providers are in those settings and are actually listening to some of our community members, this was the first time they actually could speak directly with those decision makers and also service providers. How can we create more spaces like that where we have direct communication, and then also having the coordination between bureaus and between spaces for like the commission here, where we can influence the decisions that are being made that impact directly our communities, be rooted in the solutions that come from those communities themselves. Those are ways that we see are effective ways of changing that approach. But also, I know my colleagues are really eloquent and know a lot about this topic and can speak to you more about other
Commissioner, if you don't mind, I can add. I think as Nuhamin already outlined a few things. One thing we heard a lot in those conversations is, we've seen reports, plans, but we want some tangible steps, right? I think the issues haven't changed 10 years. I mean, they've evolved, but the challenges have always been there, from access to wealth creation, to clean air, to transportation. We can take the EPAP 10 years ago and say, hey, the same thing's still happening. What are the tangible steps, right? And so when a community mentioned, for example, community gardens, it's like, great, the park has tons of spaces, community gardens. We're gonna go and have a conversation, and then we're gonna redirect those resources to connect to our community members. Let's build on these tangible steps and goals, and let's not overthink everything that, we need a plan, but these plans have always been there. The strategy has always been there. It's about investment, resources. These are tangible steps that the city can quickly do. And if East Portland hasn't been invested, imagine the outcomes, how much that we can do by putting strategic investment that fixing safety, from sidewalks to heat waves to green spaces to workforce. The impacts are substantial, but it's hard when we delay on these conversations. It adds up years and years of disinvestment. So as United Oregon, our action is to move these things forward. And ideally, we'll partner with the city and the bureaus to make sure that we address in a manner that is comprehensive rather than one-off. Again, I come back with these solutions are not that necessary. I mean, we can choose innovation and everything, but these are simple solutions we can take. And let's not make simple solution overcomplicate and complex when community members want more buses. They don't want to get shot at on the streets like everybody does. In Portland, they want community gardens to access quality food and not have heat waves and focus in East Portland. So these are simple things that the city can do quickly.
And if I could just jump into Echo Con, and maybe this is not something I should admit in a body that has the word planning in its name, but I'm a little burnt out on plans in some respects. And I think one of the tendencies that I have seen in anti-displacement plans is for them to be aspirational. That is, not totally achievable by the end of the plan period. And so what that ends up feeling like to the communities we organize is broken promises. And I know that that's how folks have felt about the 1993 Albina Community Plan, which made a lot of very beautiful promises about anti-displacement in that area that were not realized. And, just hearing what Katie said earlier around, the need for a workforce development center and that not arriving, even that very actionable, very concrete thing that we could do has not been achieved. And so as Khan's saying, I really want us to think about funding concrete actions and what we can actually do. I don't want to create a laundry list of promises that we cannot possibly fulfill to East Portland, because that causes its own harm to communities, right? I want us, if we're going to make a plan, I'm a little bit agnostic on that, then let's make sure it's fully actionable and fully realizable. And let's not do the thing that we have done before, which is put together a whole bunch of aspirations that turns out are just not something we can implement in reality.
Thank you. Good perspective. I'm going to go next to
Eli, before you go on to another commissioner question, can Bill weigh in? Thank you.
Sure. The question, as I heard it, was regarding the role PSC might have in terms of forwarding recommendations to City Council. And I would defer to Unite Oregon as to what they see as priorities that could use support. But I think some general areas that could use PSC push on is that PSC, of course, administers, is involved, a key role in administering the comprehensive plan. There are all sorts of things in the comprehensive plan about prosperity, having centers be anchors to the surrounding communities, about equitable development, ensuring everyone benefits from future development. And as you're aware, I'm sure, zoning only gets you so far. And I think Portland has done a good job of creating zoning mapping and zoning regulations that put a lot of the growth around where transit is. We have a fair number of affordable housing approaches, but I think it could be useful to reinforce City Council's awareness that to really realize the community's objectives and what's in the comprehensive plan, you need to get beyond zoning regulations. You could have plenty of commercial mixed-use zoning in a mixed-use center, but that's not creating the access for lower-income people or immigrants to be able to start businesses at Division Midway or Rosewood. It's really going to require a lot more to get us to that future that the comprehensive plan calls for, or to make centers truly be hubs for the community. Putting the right zoning in place and hoping for the best is not going to get us there. And so ideas like a multi-purpose community center that helps to anchor a center and really is shaped and created by community to serve that community could be things you want to push for in your capacity as, in a way, guardians of our land use planning, our overall community development approach. Just realizing our land use planning goals are not going to be met just through comp plan policies and zoning and comp plan maps. So that's just a thought. You know, we've shared notes with Seattle. Each one of the urban villages has a library/community center. It helps that they have a municipal library system. We're going to be a lot more dependent in Portland on being pretty intentional to work with partners to make things happen that get beyond our usual realm of responsibility. So yeah, bottom line is, think how this plays into your role in shepherding forward the comp plan, and maybe future conversations with Unite to see if there's specific asks that they could especially use backing on when they go to City Council.
Thank you. Jeff, you're next.
Sorry, started talking when you couldn't hear me. I really appreciate Callie and Con your last comments. And I'm not sure the Planning Sustainability Commission is your most effective ally, quite frankly. As you said, you don't want to talk about planning, zoning. They're really not your issues here. You talked about both of you just talked about tangible steps, funding concrete actions. And it seems to me that is the critical ambition and objective for you. I would make the humble suggestion that your plan should have that in there. I did not see a list of sort of what are your top priorities. Is the community center the most important project? I mean, I know you hate to pick a most important, but it seems to me if you could outline with some specificity, here are the concrete tangible steps you want to accomplish, and put the pressure on the City Council and the bureaus that can help you deliver those. That would be, I think what you were saying, that would move your agenda forward. And I would urge you to sort of highlight those. You started by talking about housing. I mean, one good thing about the housing needs you have is the housing bureau's got a lot of money these days. And I'm not sure they're going to develop the innovative new programs you're asking for, but they may be able to help fund them. And so I would urge you to kind of flush out what are these innovative new programs you'd like to see implemented, and certainly more so than our bureau, than the Planning Commission, the Planning Bureau, the Housing Bureau might be able to help, be the implementer of some of that objective of yours. And same with workforce housing. There's lots of workforce housing entities out there. So I think by having your concrete steps articulated and knowing what it's going to take to achieve them will help you go to whether it's city council or another partner bureau or entity and advance your plan, because the plan looks great. I mean, the goals make sense. It's a community that's entitled to have some progress made. And I think you guys are both right when you're saying it's not really more planning you want, it's the concrete steps. So I'm not sure planning sustainability is your best ally. I think this commission would obviously welcome the opportunity to be an ally, but in terms of achieving your concrete steps, I think you've got some other entities that can be better allies at delivering what you want. So, but thank you and good luck. The presentation was really helpful to hear.
Thank you. Steph, why don't you close us out?
Thank heavens, finally a small point of disagreement. I want to also back to Callie and Khan's statement that Jeff also just alluded to, talking about promise. And we talked about it last time in the West Portland Town Center, but it bears repeating about trust. But I think a lot of times we think of trust between of community members showing up and what the city is then, can show up for or not. But I also want to note that Unite, like many other community-based organizations who show up in this way to be involved in leading community engagement efforts, that's trust that you are placing, that is credibility you are putting on the line. And so to that end, my small point of disagreement is that I think that it's everyone's job. It is ours and, right? It is ours and Housing Bureau, it is ours and two things that I hear, I want to loop back in previous briefings, we're talking about the transportation system plan for the city, and also how it relates to the regional transportation plan that Metro is working on. And so as we scope that, as we go forward on the PSC, I think really keeping in mind, how does this show up? How do these plans show up for East Portland? How do we ensure that funding is there, that there is not just, as we were talking earlier, that there is a plan and that also it is a fundable plan and that those priorities are high up. And we've had I happen to know, fixing our streets, the PBOT has over 50% of those funds that are going to East Portland projects. And also that's not enough, that we still have a lot of street lighting. We see a lot of pedestrian deaths, a lot more pedestrian deaths east of 82nd Avenue. That number goes up exponentially for Black community members, and we have those studies are extant, and we need to be recognizing those too. I guess that was kind of my statement, and then my question, I'm curious, we've talked a little bit about funding, we've talked a little bit about plans, talked a little bit about how we can connect with other bureaus like the Housing Bureau that Jeff mentioned. I'm also thinking what is the conversation to be had around legislative barriers that the city of Portland can be a partner of? And I think, for example, if memory serves, and it doesn't always serve well, that there are barriers to, for example, childcare practitioners who are renting space, getting licensed and being able to practice in those spaces. Has there been any conversation of legislative barriers that can just, it doesn't necessarily move us forward, but it doesn't keep us back? Has there been conversation about those legislative barriers? Is there some movement that the city of Portland can be a part of, that the PSC can be supportive of?
I can speak to one of those in the traffic safety context, and this gets to the need for public safety alternatives to policing. And Commissioner Hardesty's office has run into this with an attempt to look at how PBOT could do traffic enforcement rather than having that in the police bureau, respecting that traffic enforcement is one of the more egregious sites of profiling by Portland police. But there is a statutory requirement that the people doing traffic enforcement must be police officers. And so in order to actually have a non-police alternative to traffic enforcement, there would need to be a statutory change to permit that. And so I would suggest that a bunch of groups lobbying the legislature to make that change would be really powerful and ultimately necessary for that to be implemented.
I might just mention one legislative change that PSC was involved in. During the Better Housing by Design project, you approved and forwarded recommendations to allow daycare centers in any multi-dwelling zone. So any apartment complex can include a daycare center, which was not previously the case. We had a bureau discussion, a multi-bureau discussion about implementing some of these actions. And one thing raised was that zoning regulations allow it, but if you're going to convert a space in an apartment complex to a daycare center, that triggers a new use set of requirements, and you'll likely be required to put in sidewalks if it's in a place like East Portland where there may not be sidewalks. And that could definitely be a deal killer. There's not tons of money to be made in daycares. Anyway, that's an example. Maybe we need to revisit how the city regulates something like that beyond just the zoning code, but just requirements for improvements for things like daycares.
Commissioner, can I?
Yes, absolutely. Come Lee, welcome.
I just want to clarify my point is that I think the commissioner and BPS are great partners, because you're right. And when I say I don't want us to stop at the plan level, but we implement and execute those items, right, to kind of build on trust. And again, I think the plan and the zoning, the policy will help move those tangible goals more efficiently, rather than and in the data and the coordination with BPS and all the bureaus thus far have been very effective. When we speak with eBag, we get to learn about different bureaus, what they're doing, how we can help connect those dots. So I just want to make sure that although I don't want to stop at the plan, I'm hoping that we continue look at that plan and put tangible money and resources behind those goals. I just want to make sure that it doesn't get lost.
Thank you. And I will maybe close this out by saying that, I mean, one of the reasons we do these briefings is because we will have decisions coming up to us that do affect East Portland. The tree code's coming up. We've got, I just had another one on my top of my tongue. But anyway, the transportation system plan update. So, I mean, this is the kind of forum that makes us better educated to make thoughtful decisions as those projects do come to us. So that's one role where we're not just like pulling out the zoning code to try and solve a problem with a zoning code fix, which I think is probably not the right stage here. But also, if you have ways that we can be supportive to, as Bill was noting, to show that this is exactly aligned with our comp plan goals, in making a call for action items at City Council, then let us know. I mean, it's going to be a little timeline for that. So thank you so much, everyone, for sharing the story and all the massive community outreach multilingually. And I've never seen anything like it. So thanks so much. And I'll close this session out, and we'll shift over to our last topic for today's meeting, which is going to be the clean air fee proposal. And Kyle Besner is going to be presenting that. Welcome, Kyle.
Great.
Good afternoon, everyone.
I'll go.
Andrea, did you want to kick this off?
Yeah, I'll just go and get a quick.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Director Durbin, start on off. Yeah.
Not a problem. Not a problem. I just wanted to recap, and for many of the planning and sustainability commissioners, you were not on the commission when we did the last update about this draft policy. This is a policy that we've been working on for over the last year, and was out for public comment at the end of last year. And we had an update for the Planning Sustainability Commission earlier this year on the draft. We've been doing stakeholder engagement with a number of different stakeholders in the community, and the commissioner also had a stakeholder process, which Kyle will cover for you. And so we just wanted to kind of let you know that this is an update on where we're at. This policy will be going out for public comment soon. And we had another policy as well, the carbon fee proposal, which we are continuing to do work, and we'll continue to do that work into 2022, early 2022. We're focusing on the clean air proposal right now, and we'll continue to do work on the carbon fee proposal and update you all on that next year. So with that, Kyle, thank you for being here.
I'm going to jump in for 1 second to see if there's anyone's got any conflict of interest to share. Julie reminds me sometimes to do this, and it looks like I do not see any. So thank you. Kyle, to you.
Okay, great. Hopefully everyone can see my PowerPoint. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all and to see so many new PSC members. That's always very exciting. So as Andrea said, we've been working on this policy for the last year and collaborating with many stakeholders, including Department of Environmental Quality, Multnomah County, and the Governor's Office. And we're at a point we're about to turn to public comment, and just wanted to give you an updated briefing on where things are. So Multnomah County and the City of Portland both share the goal of achieving clean air for their community. And air toxics are a serious source of concern in the Portland region. 14 of 19 air toxics exceed health-based ambient benchmark concentrations in the City of Portland. And air toxics are known or suspected to cause serious health problems, including cancer, nerve damage, respiratory irritation. Yet there are no federal ambient air quality standards for air toxics. The city and county's goal is to fill in the state and federal regulatory framework for air toxics by increasing local capacity to address pollution through collaboration across jurisdictions and with community stakeholders. In 2018, the city and county together commissioned this study, Ensuring Healthy Air, which really looked at what are those gaps and what is the role of local government in helping to fill those gaps. So this really provided essentially a work plan for us in implementing a clean air program at the City of Portland. Currently, our scope for this program is that it will work on providing data analysis for impacted communities and city bureaus to inform decision-making. Now, this is really key. We currently don't account for air quality impacts in our public decision-making for, say, something like a freight master plan or changes to the zoning code. And so this would be a big change for the city to build this capacity internally, to do this air quality monitoring and analysis and be able to help community understand that data, and for community, therefore, to better engage in public policy processes around air quality with Oregon DEQ and specific to specific permits, to having better capacity to engage in those discussions. And that's probably the one thing I'm most excited about this program, but that's just the surface. We're going to go a lot deeper and working with our local, regional, and state partners to maximize the impacts of pollution reduction projects, specifically looking at reducing community exposure to diesel PM, wood smoke, including wildfire events, and addressing heat, which we all know is a serious concern at this point and has significant health impacts. And it's one of those impacts that is right at that nexus of climate change and air quality. So we really want to leverage this program to get the dual benefits there as much as possible. And then lastly, we'll offer a grant program to support community and businesses through a grant program to reduce emissions, as well as developing good neighbor agreements. So a little bit of background here on the policy process and where we've been. So in June 2020, Portland City Council adopted a climate emergency declaration. And at the time, the mayor directed BPS to look for revenue options to fund the climate emergency declaration and our air quality work. Having identified a few years back that air quality was a critical issue that the city needed to step up and address. We initially took public comment on an original proposal for a clean air fee and a healthy climate fee last November and December, and then have spent the last year since then working with stakeholders to refine those proposals. And in April of this year, Commissioner Rubio kicked off 4 months of stakeholder engagement workshops. And that included a variety of participants representing industry, university institutions, business associations, environmental justice organizations, environmental advocates, building trades, and some of our jurisdictional partners. Coming out of that process, I don't want to say that we all agreed on the path forward, but we all agreed on a shared set of policy goals. And this is really exciting and reaffirming of the work that we've been doing in Portland over the last decade. So first, that Portland would be a leader in clean air and carbon-free industry, that we would support existing building businesses to transition to zero carbon. And I think that really speaks to an important role for the city as a partner in this transition. We'll center the clean energy transition with BIPOC businesses and local businesses, that Portland will become a healthy, just, and equitable place to live. Right there, I was just looking at this, our Portland plan goals right there. You know, it's great to see these things come back around and that they still have value and meaning to our community. And then lastly, that we actually meet our air quality and climate goals, which is the reason we're all here today, or at least the reason I'm here today. So one of the exciting projects that has emerged through this discussion is about a clean industry hub and incubator. This really was something that emerged through the first workshops and really was very exciting for stakeholders. And the concept here is a public-private collaboration space to develop new cutting-edge, low-carbon, low-waste, clean air, and circular production practices, specifically to benefit Portland businesses. Right now, BPS has submitted a fall general fund budget request to hire one staff person to start moving that work forward, and a scoping study to really look at the scope of the hub and identify what the key priorities there would be and how that could get built out. We've also submitted an application for the Economic Development Agency funding to help fund this hub. And we really think that there's going to be additional federal funding opportunities to support this work in the coming years. So we're seeking to stand this up enough that we can pitch this concept and attract additional funding, both from the federal government, but also I think this would be of interest for different philanthropic organizations. So I'm going to talk a bit now about the clean air fee. And so just before I get into the details on the slide, at a higher level, what this fee is intending to do. The clean air fee would be applied to about 72 entities in the city of Portland that hold air contaminant discharge permits with the state of Oregon. So the state has already identified a class of entities who are the largest sources of air pollution in the city of Portland, the largest stationary sources, I should specify. And so we're proposing to levy the fee against that class. And there are 3 high-level permits that we're targeting, so simple, standard, and Title V. We're not applying this to the basic air contaminant discharge permit holders. That level is much larger. There are hundreds of organizations and includes lots of small businesses like dry cleaners and nail salons. So we're targeting only the larger entities and the larger sources of stationary pollution that hold simple, standard, or Title V permits. We've adjusted this fee based on stakeholder feedback. It was noted in public comments that there were disparities in the fee level for simple and standard permit holders. We had those tiered, but when you actually dig into the permit data, the emissions just don't correspond in that way. So we've standardized those to a $20,000 base fee for both the simple and standard permits. On Title V, another bit of feedback we got was how we could align the fee level with pollution level as much as possible to create an incentive for entities to reduce emissions over time. In working with Oregon DEQ, we determined that was only possible for the Title V entities where there is already significant verification about those pollution levels for particulate matter, SOx, NOx, and volatile organic compounds. So we're proposing the $20,000 per ton fee for Title V, plus an additional $250 per ton fee on that emission. And originally we had proposed $40,000 total for Title V. So this is a bit of a hybrid approach to create some incentive for companies to reduce those emissions. So next steps here, we have public comment coming up. We're hoping to put this out for public comment October 18th, so next Monday, and it'll be out through November 5th. And we would welcome feedback from the PSC to the extent that that makes sense. I know you all will deliberate on that and decide. We're moving towards city council hearings by the end of this year. And then we will continue to work on the carbon fee proposal in 2022. So that isn't finished, but we're prioritizing this fee first, given that there are no resources at the city of Portland to support air quality. So I just want to reiterate some of the outcomes from standing up an air quality program. So we'll have cleaner air contributing to decreased rates of asthma, cardiovascular and respiratory diseases, and hopefully cancer over time, especially for impacted communities. Communities and businesses will have access to increased resources to reduce air pollution, including technical assistance. Reductions in exposure to pollution from motor vehicles, construction equipment, residential wood smoke, and wildfire events, and heat with a priority focus on the most impacted communities and neighborhoods. And we'll also focus on improved community understanding of air quality data and information. And again, be able to provide that kind of analysis for city staff to inform project and policy decisions like transportation and freight planning. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open this up for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Kyle. Folks, let's raise your hands with any questions. And actually, as you're thinking about your questions, I'll volunteer that the preparatory discussion we have for this briefing is that the PSC is not obliged to opine on this. It's not like a zoning code update. However, we could, and we do have a time overlapping with the public hearing notice. So if we want to comment on this, we have the opportunity to do so. We would need to put that on a future agenda because we didn't put enough time in that for this one. But that's something that you can weigh in on that too if you want to, about whether we want to send a letter on this topic. Jesse.
I just, first of all, thank you for the presentation. That was really helpful to get some background, but I just have some kind of informational questions. First of all, I was interested in if y'all have done any analysis on what this means for prices for consumers. I don't know the 72 entities that are going to be regulated by this, but I'm assuming obviously they probably make money from selling things to consumers. So I was wondering if there's been any analysis on if all of those fees are going to be shifted to consumers or how that typically works, or if that's anything that's been looked at. And then before you get to the answer of that one, my second question is, I've seen quite a bit of BPS projects come through that try and prioritize like BIPOC or women-owned businesses, which is awesome. I love to see that. But I am also interested in perhaps seeing some more preference for like cooperatively run businesses and things like that that would meet a wider range of ownership, including both women and BIPOC owners. So I was wondering if that's anything that's ever been considered in the city. I brought it up before once or twice, but haven't really heard much back on that front. So.
Okay, I can respond to these. Thank you, Commissioner Geitmeyer and Commissioner Spivak. So to the first question, this is really a very different set of entities than the entities that are subject to the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund, which are retail entities. And, in that case, very much we did see those taxes passed on to consumers. In this case, the entities are very different. There's a number of hospitals and universities, really large industrials like Vigor and Everaz that are making projects that go into construction, but don't necessarily go direct to consumers. So it is really a very different set of stakeholders. So we don't expect that the fees will be passed on to consumers in that same way. In addition, I'll note that the fees are relatively low. For many, $20,000 a year, except for those Title V, where that goes a little bit higher than that. And so given that lower cost per year, we don't expect to see that kind of an impact. And to your second question, we haven't considered how cooperatively run businesses would factor into this particular program. I'm not sure. I'd have to give that more full thought. I definitely, think that they're very important and want to see how we can continue to support that. I'm not sure how it applies in this context, given that we're dealing with a set of businesses already identified by the state. But certainly that's something we can continue to discuss as we stand up a program and start to hire staff that are going to implement, and they can think through how that would apply to the work they're doing.
Thanks. Next to Katie, and then I'll jump in after Katie. Katie.
Yeah, I did a quick calculation in my head, and what is it, 1.5 million, or is it more?
2 million a year about.
Okay, and so one of the things that well, a couple of things, and these all sound. It doesn't matter. What I'm interested in though is like diesel is something that I know goes before the legislature almost every legislative session. And that, the last time I dipped into that issue, the issue was that Oregon standards were so much lower or higher, easy on the diesel, so that basically California and Washington were dumping their old diesels in Oregon. I was wondering, has that changed, and are and how much of the of air quality problems are coming from diesel? And are these people, the people that we're taxing here, are they the ones that are generating that diesel? I don't know enough about air quality to be able to tell you if the diesel is the main quantity. But I'd be interested in knowing that. And then the other thing that it seems like lately, and this is maybe above our pay grade here on planning and sustainability, but I've been noticing a strategy that goes for a subset of entities that reside in our great city, and we're taxing kind of different little. It's like a slicing off different groups and then taxing them, but you never really see the whole picture. And I'm wondering if that isn't something that we owe ourselves to make sure that we're not doing that so much that it becomes counterproductive. And I guess counterproductive would be as if people were finally deciding, I just don't want to do business in the city of Portland because it's just like every time there's a new tax. And you do hear that from people. So those are my concerns. I actually love the idea that we're going to be attacking air pollution, but those are some of the things that I'm concerned about.
Kyle? Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Larsell. Great questions. So first, to the question of diesel, I've worked with the legislature and testified year after year on diesel bills. So I share your frustration. The legislature did pass a large diesel bill 2020. No, that doesn't sound right. It must have been the year before. And that bill solved some of the challenges, but not the whole picture. And in fact, it really didn't address off-road diesel consumption, which is diesel in the construction sector. And so that's what we've called out in our work plan here, is specifically working on construction sector diesel, which is something that we've addressed through our own construction projects. We stood up the Clean Air Construction Standard in partnership with our regional partners, Metro, the Port of Portland, Multnomah County, Washington County, TriMet, all adopting these same standards for our own construction projects. So I think there is continued work to do at the local level to look at solutions that take that more broadly to the private sector, and that will be something that this team will consider. Diesel, the largest source of diesel PM in Portland is off-road. And so that is really construction sector emissions in the city. Now, there are other sources of air pollution that affect Portlanders, particularly wood smoke and industrial sources of emission, like these covered facilities that we've mentioned here. So, why the covered entities are stationary and the diesel sources are mobile, these entities are not responsible for the diesel particulate matter, but they're responsible for other air toxics and other sources of emissions that we also need to address. So a lot of this comes down to the city's limitations in our own authority and the challenges of addressing dispersed diesel sources that are mobile. And so that's something that we'll look to. I think there are opportunities, to your question about targeting just one subset. I think there are opportunities to expand this more broadly once we get a clean air program stood up and staff on board who can dig into these issues and really figure out, particularly for those construction sites, what's the best path forward for us. You had a great question that was possibly above your pay grade, and that may be above my pay grade as well. I'm not quite sure how to respond to that. This is a subset of entities that the state has identified for us. For us to look at broader sources of pollution that are not already identified by the state would require us to stand up a whole air quality regulatory program that would be doing a lot of duplicative work to what the state is doing. So that's why we've leveraged this set of entities that the state has already identified to reduce the administrative costs for the city, as well as the administrative costs for covered entities that don't have to deal with two different regulatory bodies. So we're really relying on that air quality work that's already happening at the state level to create a simpler, easier program to administer, both for covered entities and for our Revenue Bureau. So hopefully that answers that question. But
so in other words, I asked about the diesel, and I was asking about what the percentage was. Do you know what the percentage is, or
well, they don't really measure it in that same way. So there's modeling that looks at diesel, and then I can tell you what the percentages are of where that comes from. And then there's modeling that looks at other air toxics, but how you take that in whole is not something that has been done or can really be done, because what is
let me rephrase
it's
it.
just really complicated with air toxics.
Isn't it that you know what the impact is on the population from these different kinds of air pollution, right? I mean,
correct. So
that's been modeled, right?
Yeah, the state has a program called the Portland Air Toxics Assessment, and it does that modeling work, but it's not in total, it's at each individual type of pollution they look at, they model that separately. So the data is pretty robust, but it is modeled data, and this is an example of why we need additional resources at the city to do additional modeling, to better understand that modeling, and to be able to do more analysis around it.
Okay, thank you. And I doubt that your group that is working on this is going to want to be putting together a whole study on all these different taxes. And because it seems like this is a relatively new phenomena. And so I guess I would say that would be something I would be interested in seeing, perhaps not from your group, but in general, is to see, if these, because we hear about this in different ways and analogous ways. In other words, there's the analogy of the problems with building in Portland seems to be somewhat affected by how much regulation they are having to deal with, and how quickly the regulation is, the permits, et cetera, go out. So I guess I'm a little concerned about unintended consequences. That's all I need to say. So thank you.
I'll jump in with a couple questions. One of them, you opened talking about how exciting to have the data available so it could be used. This is an education thing for me. Are there approval criteria in the land use world or building code that rely on air quality data that we can't apply the criteria because we don't have the data? That's one question. Another is, I'm just wondering if the county or the Gresham have any parallel programs going on. I know the county just had a recent rule related to wood fires. So they're creating the regulation. I don't know if they're providing an income stream, to cover that. And I guess my last question is whether there's a nexus of funds to be able to check, because a lot of the goals bridge air pollution and no carbon practices. I just don't know if these funds as proposed would be allowed to use for just reducing carbon, or whether that would need to hold for future project or use other sources of funds, because the list of program uses of funds is more expansive than the income source proposed, which is really related to pollutants, not just carbon dioxide.
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner Spivak. I'm sorry, I missed the first question.
Oh, sure. The first one is whether is the data that you were excited at the beginning to say we actually have data to start, we could use the data. I didn't know what use the data meant. I mean, there are some times where you need to have data to evaluate whether a project meets the approval criteria or building code. Is this covering a gap, or is this more like educating residents in the community what is their air quality level, because for whatever reason they can't get it from DEQ?
Yeah, great questions. Thank you, Commissioner Spivak. So it is a gap. We don't have the data that is in a format that can be analyzed and used for that kind of public decision making. As to whether there are things that are required in land use planning, I would have to defer to our planners on that question. I don't know, but we do not have air quality data that gets integrated into the planning work that the city currently does. It's just not we don't have air quality scientists on staff. We don't have the technical expertise to do our own monitoring and to analyze that work. So we rely on what DEQ provides through the PATs, but it is limited. And so it's definitely a big gap. It's something that we've heard from stakeholders, something we've heard from the Department of Environmental Quality. And that pairs not only with the community need to fill that gap in the community being able to better understand that data, but also for our own operations. And so, that's why I'm excited, because it helps to fulfill two needs and helps all of us to better engage with the state around air quality work. In terms of wood smoke and the pilot at the county, they have received some funding from the legislature to stand up a pilot program around wood smoke. So we see an opportunity to partner with them to take that program further. Right now, they have very limited resources, maybe enough to do a pilot in a neighborhood. But we think by having an air quality program at the city, we'll be able to bolster that and take those resources further by continuing to support their work. And we really think that it's going to be critical for the city of Portland to partner with all of our regional jurisdictional partners on the air quality work. We don't want to be duplicative. So we want to leverage and what's already happening and fill in gaps where we can. And then to your question of that nexus point between clean air and carbon reduction, there are a lot of actions that we can take to reduce carbon emissions that have clean air benefits. Think about electrification, for example, is a great example of that. Gas two-stroke leaf blowers replaced with an electric leaf blower is a good example of reducing air pollution and achieving a climate benefit. So we've articulated that in the program purpose. When that goes out for public comment, you'll see in the code, it says what the funds will be used for. And so we called out funding projects that are at that nexus of reducing carbon emissions and air pollution. So that will be a program priority. It's obviously, climate change is obviously a bureau priority. So we'll look to leverage that to the greatest extent possible, but no, these dollars won't go for climate mitigation on its own if there isn't an associated air quality co-benefit.
Got it. Thank you. Jeff, and you're next.
Thank you. So my understanding is the money, and I understand to be at, is that $2 million a year annually? Is that a rough? So it's right now earmarked for staff. So my question is, what FTE level will that allow? And then I guess my concern is we've had a climate action plan for a while, and it gets a lot of attention, but I'm not sure it gets actionable implementation steps. And so now I'm hearing $2 million a year focused on air quality programs. And I'm wondering as we, and this is more of a policy discussion I wish we had had at some point, is air quality programming and air quality reduction, is that a priority program for addressing climate action concerns? carbon reduction, you say, well, it can help with that, but it has to be based on air quality. And I guess I'm wondering, transportation is a huge emitter of CO2s. So this is now going to raise $2 million a year to fund staff that needs to focus on air quality rather than emissions from transportation and things we could do to address transportation's impact on the climate problem. And I guess I'm wondering whether we're using a funding mechanism to push us into a policy direction that maybe isn't the priority policy direction we should be going for our climate action plan. And seems to me that's the kind of policy question this commission, as a sustainability commission, maybe should be having. I almost wish the money could be used broadly. Is there a legal reason, just because we're raising the money from these industrial entities, does that legally require us to focus the spending of the money on air quality versus other climate action programs we think we might decide are more efficient or more effective or address a larger piece of the problem? So I guess I'm asking, is that a policy or a legal determination? And then finally, I guess I wish I understood, for example, if you were to say we're going to hire $2 million worth of FTE on the planning side, boy, I could think of about 10 different planning programs. It would be great to have the resources to investigate and pursue and perhaps implement. And this may just be my ignorance, I don't know what programs we might want to pursue on the sustainability side with $2 million worth of staff to address. And I'm just bothered. I'm wondering whether, again, I come back to where I started, is air quality really the priority, particularly since the state does have an air quality program. I understand people criticize it. It may not be as robust as it should be, but at least it exists. So I guess my question is now, one, how much FTE, and two, the policy of making air quality programming the top priority for our sustainability climate action work. And that may be an unfair question to put on you, the second part, Kyle, but I'll raise it anyways and see if what reaction you've got.
Thank you, Commissioner Backrack. I'm happy to respond to that. I see Andrea turned her camera on, so she probably wants to jump in on that too. Andrea, do you want me to go first? Or?
I'm happy to go first, Cal, and thank you for the questions. So I think just to make sure that the commission, the PSC is fully aware that the impetus for developing this clean air program has really been at the request of and response to what community is asking the city to do. The study that Kyle mentioned that the city did jointly with the county in 2018 really identified that there are some gaps, that the city has authority, but we're not really kind of stepping up and addressing clean air issues and needs. And that this is really a significant health issue. It's an environmental justice issue. Portland has the worst air quality in the state and some of the worst diesel pollution in the nation. And it is directly impacts communities of color, low-income communities more significantly than others. So this proposal really comes from a call from community organizations to ask the city to really step up and work in partnership with DEQ and work in partnership with the county. And that's kind of what that study really scoped out and kind of called for developing resources to do that. The resources that are being generated, estimating about 2 million, could be a little bit less. Half of which, some percentage is going to go to, for administrative purposes, for revenue to administer the program, because this is part of the business license tax. Half of it will go to provide resources for BPS to create a program and hire staff. Half of it will go to investing in community-based solutions. So helping invest in businesses, communities who are implementing solutions to reduce air pollution, and particularly air pollution that's impacting at biggest risk communities that are biggest risk.
Can I jump in a second? There can't be three halves. So
thank you.
Yes, so up to 11% goes to revenue, and then from that, the rest, about half, is going to go to staff, and half is going to go to community grants. Yeah. And
that's for 4 FTE, because you did ask for the number of FTE.
yes. And I think the other question, Commissioner Backrack, your question about kind of the opportunities with climate absolutely continues to be and remains our priority, and we're working hard to get kind of better resources to do that work, and really be able to scale up and deliver on the commitments that have been made, both in previous climate action plans and the climate emergency declaration. That does not change, that remains. And working on addressing air quality does present some opportunities for those co-benefits with carbon reduction. So if you're addressing diesel, you're reducing black carbon, which is also a contributor to climate change. So there are those opportunities where by focusing on clean air, we're going to be benefiting the climate, and we're going to be responding to community needs that are directly kind of calling on us, to the city, to really step up and address what's a significant environmental justice problem in the city.
Okay, quick follow-up, if I may, Chair. Andrew, did you say 11% goes to administering the program? And then you said of the remaining, so it'd be what, 89%, half is for FTE, and then half is, this is where my question is, to community groups, or what's the?
We'll have a grant program for community-based solutions. So those solutions could be for community groups, they can be for businesses that want to invest in kind of landscaping companies that want to get rid of their gas-powered blowers, for instance, right? I mean, things like that. So providing real resources. I think this is going to be a real opportunity to partner with the county. They just received money from the state to make some changes and upgrades in the wood smoke swap out program, but that's, those are one-time funds. There's probably opportunities for us to partner with the county in administering that program. So really looking at on-the-ground solutions that require investments to upgrade old technology.
Here's my quick skepticism. So the numbers, as I'm thinking real quickly, 2 million, 11% goes to admin, half FTE. That leaves somewhere like $400,000 for this investment program to community groups, businesses. That pales to when you think about what's now being called to $100 million that the PSEF funds have, that does grants to community groups to address various issues having to do with sustainability and climate action. I'm almost wondering whether we'd be better off as an entity working more closely with the distribution of PSEF funds and giving them more input, guidance, thoughts about how to spend that, which ultimately is public tax dollar money. Seems like there's a hell of a lot more bang for the buck if we could help. Whatever this $400,000 is going to go for investments, it's not very much, but if we could use the thinking and share the thinking with this other sister fund, I'd call it, that seems to me a more efficient and effective way, because I'd almost suggest you keep your $400,000 for staff rather than a tiny drop in the bucket to give to community groups. I'm just not sure how far and how effective a $400,000 community investment fund is, particularly again in comparison to a $100 million fund. So just some thoughts to consider going forward. Thanks.
Thanks. Erica, you're next.
I had some, I think, similar reactions to Jeff and Director Durbin. Your comments provided some helpful context about how the need for this program originated, but it seemed to me like if we looked at carbon emissions and air quality as like this Venn diagram, do we have two overlapping circles, or is there something that we're missing out on by just really doubling down on and focusing on the climate action plan and on the emissions? Because if we reduce those, then we reduce the air quality issues. And I think that what Jeff was getting at with some of the economies of scale that might be lost when we try to fracture things and divide the objectives, between different programs, do they become less effective? I had a similar question about the use of PSEF funds for projects that do address air quality. And it seems like that, at least with my understanding of how those funds can be distributed now, those would likely be qualifying projects. So I guess I'm still a little bit interested in understanding where those gaps existed, and if the community benefit is not just through the disbursement of the $400,000 funds, but also in reducing the air quality pollution that is most harmful. And I was curious with the modeling that exists currently and that you've digested, like what is the breakdown between all of the different sources that have been listed: industry, construction equipment, transportation, wood burning stoves? Where is the harm to human health within that? And specifically, like within the harm to human health, where is the harm to communities of color that are most at risk? And then how does that translate to the current fee proposal? Like, is industry going by taxing them and generating this income, are we hoping that there's a reduction or something in emissions? I guess that was some additional context that would be helpful to understand how this come together so far.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. I can go first. One thing I do want to note is that the grant fund is about $800,000, not 450, so it's a bit larger there. And I do want to note that PSEF—
My apologies for the bad math, Kyle.
No problem. And the PSEF dollars are restricted in that they can't go towards air quality projects. They can go towards carbon reduction projects. And if they get an air quality benefit, that's a great co-benefit. But there are air toxic issues that don't wholly overlap with climate issues. So it is a Venn diagram that overlaps, but not wholly. And so we have work to do on both sides. Both are critical, pressing issues for the city and for community health, for the health of our economy, for all these things. And so it is a priority for us in both air quality and climate. To your question about those sources, so we do know that the entire Portland metro area has higher levels of air pollution than are acceptable. And so we have significant work to do, but there are areas in the city that have even higher levels of pollution that are along, and these are areas that we tend to have higher populations of communities of color and low-income populations. So areas along freeways, along the rail yards, along the industrial corridors, the industrial districts. So we do know, and the Multnomah County has studied this and has identified, I think it's people of color in Portland are 4 times more likely to be exposed to air pollution. And so it is a significant environmental justice issue, and that's why we're prioritizing this. The other thing I would note is that we can't use PSEF dollars for city programs, those dollars are also restricted. So the goal here is really to stand up a clean air program so that we can, and we don't expect that these fees are high enough to reduce pollution on their own. That was a question that I heard. But it's intended to raise revenue so that we can hire air quality experts on staff to work with community and businesses to reduce air pollution. And so some of the work will be policies, some of it will be technical assistance, some of it will be help with communications and messaging around bad air pollution days and how to protect your health. So we'll have a variety of different mechanisms. And I would encourage you to look at the Ensuring Healthy Air study, which really identified all those really unique roles for local government to help fill that gap between the state and federal regulatory framework. So hopefully I've answered your question there, but if there's something I missed, please let me know.
Well, I was also just curious to understand with the different key air quality sectors that you mentioned, what portion of toxic pollution are they responsible for? Like, is that understood? You know, is it primarily coming from transportation and then industry and then wood smoke is a tiny little sliver? Like, what's the breakdown of that look like?
Again, this kind of goes back to the confusing answer I gave earlier, in that it's really hard to compare diesel particulate matter, wood smoke, and air toxics, which are all different and overlapping in how they affect us. So I can't specifically answer your question, but I can say that the largest kind of source of concern is really diesel particulate matter. And that is the one source that has the greatest impact on communities of color. We don't have the taxing authority at the city to tax mobile diesel sources. So we are constrained with our own regulatory authority into what our options are to raise revenue. And so that's why we're recommending an approach that leverages the existing permit program at the state level.
Thank you. Steph.
Sweet. I know we're over time. Thank you for staying. I'll just confine mine mostly to a comment. The obvious comment between these two briefings that you mentioned, a clean industry hub and incubator, and we just got done hearing from East Portland Community Summit, one of their priorities being job training and wanting an incubator. So I'm just curious, has there been active conversations with folks from East Portland Community Summit and Unite Oregon as to what a climate resilient job training program and business incubator might look like through a carbon fee proposal?
Thank you, Commissioner Ralph. So we have connected with labor on this question, not the group that you mentioned, but other stakeholders that were a part of our stakeholder workshop, and have identified supporting workers in that workforce transition is really a key area of concern and an area of focus for our work. So we're actually hiring a staff person at EPS who will have a lead role on workforce, and we're including that within the scope of the scoping study that we're doing to develop this hub. So we'll be looking at that workforce question through that study. We think this is a great opportunity to leverage that, and it would be great to connect with Unite Oregon and bring them into those conversations.
And I would just add that we are doing another study through PSEF on workforce development and workforce opportunities in the future. And we are doing a lot of work with community-based organizations, and I believe Unite is a part of that. So yes, so these studies and kind of efforts will be coming together. And I do think that the Clean Industry Hub is a real opportunity to think and be intentional about new job creation for East Portlanders.
Well, thank you, staff, Kyle and Andrea, for presenting this. And I hope you take our questions as focus group feedback. Because I think that's one of the roles the PSC can play, help dial in on issues and raise questions. I don't know what we do with this. So I think that'll have to be between now and the next meeting, or the next one, maybe officers. I will give one little bit of idea is that I didn't read the whole Healthy Air study, but I bet it's got a map showing the locations and low-income census tracts or something like that. But that might be something that would help answer that question ahead of time. It'll ultimately come up. And it's part of the case for this program, frankly, is that it's got. So I think a map might be helpful. So I'm gonna say that unless there's any more comments or questions. With that, we will adjourn today's meeting. Thank everyone so much, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care.